Hey guys, this is Ryan from XeroFour.com. This time of year it's starting to get cold here in Wisconsin and it's time to start building some ice fenders too. So the usual disclaimers apply. Don't forget to throw your safety glasses on, your hearing protection when you're doing this. You can start by removing your stock axle block hardware. Set that aside, you won't be needing that till summertime. The XeroFour axle blocks, install stock axle, slide it through and reinstall. Don't forget, look up in your manual what the manufacturer torque specs are for the axle nut and torque it down accordingly. From there you can grab your first hoop. These are pre-bent hoops. They may take a little tweaking depending on how wide your swing arm is. Mock it up in place, get it marked in the general location of where you'd like to cut it. You can always cut off more later, so you can keep it a little long to begin with. As usual, mark twice, cut once, and make sure your cuts are square. These cuts can be on a bandsaw, they can be done with a hand hack saw, or even an angle grinder if needed. Once they're mounted, double check your wheel space between your tire wraps, your tires, make sure everything's even. One trick I like to use is you can take your axle blocks back off, align them in their position, and actually flip them over. Once they're flipped over, you can use the threaded holes with an awl or a hole punch and mark the holes. This does take a little bit extra time, but it ensures the holes will be correctly spaced as well as correctly centered. From there you can take these over to the drill press if you have it. If you don't, just make sure you throw it in a vise and you can do it with a hand drill. Throw some Loctite on there. This does stop the galling from happening with the aluminum and the stainless steel, as well as ensures that your bolts will not rattle out. Double check your tire gap, as well as room for your wraps, and you can move on to your vertical member. The vertical member will be mounted the same way. If you plan on putting bigger tires on later, make sure you leave room for any larger tires, Canadian studs, or even larger wraps. From there you can use the same process. Scribe your holes, center punch them, and drill them. At this point you can begin mocking up your carbon fender, or if you choose to use a plastic fender, those work too. AMA rules requires 7 inches of fender. Depending on your wraps and how easy they are to get on and off, you can either position your fender with a full 7 inches if you're planning on doing some races. If not, you can actually cut them a little bit shorter so it's easier to get your wraps on and off. I like to ensure the carbon fiber fenders don't fall or move during the drilling process. You can take straps, bungee cords, or even tape. I like these simple cinch straps. They work great, they hold them in place, and they do not scratch the fenders. At this time, I do like marking, measuring, and drilling my holes on the bike. If you add a drill bit stop to your drill, you can make sure you do not go too deep. Take either a tape measure or a micrometer. Make sure you measure. Make sure the holes are evenly spaced. And then take your time when installing the bolts. The large washers included in the kit are for the carbon fender. This ensures the load is distributed properly and does not puncture through the carbon fiber fender. All the chips are out of the fenders. Make sure all the chips are off the tires, and make sure there's nothing that's going to get sandwiched between the actual carbon fiber fender and the frame. Once again, a little bit of Loctite doesn't hurt. That actually helps lube up the stainless steel threads. From there, you will prevent any galling of stainless on stainless, as well as you still have the nylon lock nuts on the inside of the fender to hold the fender securely. Then we can move on to the fronts. Pull out your stock axle hardware. Mock up the axle blocks. You can actually hold them up by hand, mark them with a marker for the X coordinates as well as the Y coordinates, and these will intersect. They don't need to be perfect. The holes are actually going to be a little bit oversized so that you can actually slide the bolts through nice and easy, but do take your time in marking where the holes go. For this drilling process, I like to use a milling machine. This ensures the holes are square and straight, as well as parallel to each other. This can also be done with a hand drill and a vise if needed. Then you can take the blocks back to the bike, hand tighten your bolts, make sure everything is tight and square. You can go back and forth from one fastener to the other just to make sure the pinch bolts are working properly. Refer to your manufacturer's owner's manual for torque specs. Repeat the process on the other side. Time, mark them, drill them, tighten them down, and double check the torque. As you can see here, jumping back and forth from one fastener to the other, make sure the torque is even, as well as make sure the block is properly seated on the fork legs. Some other models may have horizontal bolts or even angled bolts. Grab your hoops. You can mark them in place, hold them up, double check them, make sure your gap is correct all the way around for your tires as well as your wraps. You can always cut them a little long and take more off later. It's personal preference. The hoops can go on the inside of the brackets or the outside of the brackets, whichever you prefer. Once you're ready, hold the hoops in place, grab 2 pair of vice grips, and you can actually apply the vice grips over the holes. This will allow you to drill the second set of holes and not scratch up any visible surface. Look at your fenders, make sure they're square, make sure the hoops have plenty of room, and then you're ready to drill. The vice grips hold the hoop in place, and I personally like to drill through the pilot holes and the hoop all in one shot. Holding the hoop in place with the vice grips makes sure your parts stay where intended, as well as make sure the holes are concentric. Grab the larger M6 bolts from your hardware kit. Supplied with the kit is nylon lock nuts. This is to stop the vibration and loosening of the fasteners over the season. From there you can repeat the same process on the other side. Remove the vice grips once the bolts are holding the hoops in place, and you can move on to your second set of holes. And back to cleanup. Then you can move on to your vertical hoops. These hoops can be mounted 90 degrees to the horizontal hoops, or you can actually lean them back towards the fork legs if needed. Step back, take a look again, look at your gap between your fenders and your tire wraps, and then repeat the process. Clamp them in place with the vice grips, both sides, drill one side at a time, install one set of bolts, remove the vice grips, and install the second set of bolts after drilling. Then we move on to mounting the carbon. Most front applications require some sort of trimming of the carbon fender. They're extra long for the rear application. You can choose if you'd like to cut the front edge or the trailing edge. It's also personal preference. I normally choose to cut the front edge. Cutting the carbon fiber can be done with a simple bandsaw, hacksaw, or any sort of fine tooth saw. Once the cut's complete, finish off the edges with 400 grit sandpaper. Please take care when you're cutting. Wear a respirator and gloves as well as eye protection, and clean the fenders off when you're done. From there you can strap the fenders in place. I still like to use straps on these as well. Measure your holes accordingly. You can either choose 2 or 3 holes, it's completely up to you. Same procedure as the rear fenders. Drill them. Use a drill stop to ensure you do not drill into your tire. Be sure to clean up any metal shards between the carbon fiber and the metal fenders before installing your final time. Final application, make sure there's enough room for your fork guards as well as your brake lines. Lock nuts on the inside nice and tight. Fork pinched bolts tightened down to factory torque specs. I usually recommend after your first ride, double check all the fasteners, make sure everything is good to go for a long season. And of course when you're done, make sure you throw some stickers on there. It's definitely worth a few seconds off your lap times.